Morning, everyone. Last chance if you want to get out of here with the kids. I'll pretend I'm praying here and you can go. If that's what you want to do. Welcome here. Good to be here with you guys. We're going to take a 1-week hiatus from the series that we're going through on Revelation. Curtis graciously offered that I could share in the preaching of Revelation with him, and I said, that's quite all right. That's going to spare the church the pain of having me jump into that. Been appreciating the messages, been learning lots, been really into the series. Just glad I don't have to be preaching it right now. So I've been reading through the book of Isaiah recently, and I've just been reminded again at how many amazing passages are in that book of the Bible. We're going to look at one of them today, Isaiah chapter 40. If you do have a Bible, I'd encourage you to flip it open to Isaiah 40. If you don't have a Bible, there should be one in the chairs close to you. It's on page 586. So as you're turning there, I'll give you just a little bit of context here so that we all know which direction we're heading, since we're kind of jumping into the middle of a chapter, and we're going to be jumping into the middle of the book, really. So if you go back 2,000 years, that's about the time of Jesus, and then if you go back about another 700 years, that's the time of Isaiah. And Isaiah was writing to the Israelites, and in at chapter 40, he's writing to the Israelites who were in exile. The Jews at that time were few in number. There was only a remnant, and they were facing a long and difficult journey. You see, the victories of Assyria, of Babylon, and of Persia had made it look like the false gods of the Gentiles were like more powerful than the true God of the Israelites. And even though all this came about because of their disobedience and their rebellion, Isaiah is writing to remind them that they aren't forgotten, that they are very much on God's heart. God still loves them, and His plans are going to be fulfilled. Better days are ahead. So let's read our passage together today. We're going to pick out verses 21, and we're going to go 21 to 31. I'd love to go through the whole chapter, but just for time purposes today, we'll go with a shorter text. It says, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown. No sooner do they take root in the ground that He blows on them and they wither. And a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. To whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name. Because of His great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and His understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." Amen. I feel like I said that in the first service. I feel like I could just close in prayer now after reading that passage because it's just so beautiful. No luck, though. I'm still going to preach, so nice try. In this passage, we see that Israel is struggling and feeling discouraged. It didn't seem like they were praising God all that much at this time. Rather, they were complaining, and that it seemed like God was distant, and that he didn't know about their struggles, and if he did know, it seemed like he didn't care. They looked at the long road that they had before them, and they said, we don't know if we have the strength to get through this. It seems like there's going to be a lot of dark days. We've all been there, haven't we? I mean, not specifically in exile in Babylon, I get that, but we've all been in situations that we don't want to be in. That seem hopeless, like no matter what, it's going to be a long journey to better days. Maybe that's where you're at today. So what do you do when you're feeling like that? Like, I don't want to be here, but I don't necessarily know where else to go. In those times, it can be common for people to turn away from God in those times. To do what these Israelites are saying. It feels like I'm forgotten, God. And for us, it can be a natural move for people to turn away from God and say, forget it. This week when I came across a quote from G.K. Chesterton, who said, when belief in God becomes difficult, the tendency is to turn away from him. But in heaven's name, to what? I think that there's probably people in this room, lots of people in this room, who have thought that thought before, who have said those words to themselves, if to no one else. Isaiah knew where God's people were at, and as he wrote them, he wrote to encourage them, he wrote to comfort them, and he wrote to challenge them. And what he does is he calls God's people to remember. He does it in a bit of a weird way, though. He says, do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? The reason why Isaiah is saying this is because Israel did know. Israel had heard. They had been told from the beginning that God was who he was. They knew God. So in other words, what Isaiah is saying to them is, remember. You have to remember. Okay, Isaiah, remember what? Well, there's a lot of things that we could talk about in this chapter. This is just a beautiful passage. I'd love to point out 7 or 8 things that Isaiah would like us to remember, wanted Israel to remember, but just for time purposes, I want to pull out just 4 of them that resonated with me. Would that be okay? This is your opportunity. If you were like my son Trace, you would see this as an opportunity to negotiate and say, what about 1? We could get 1 going here, yeah. I'm glad nobody's chiming in there. First thing that Isaiah wants Israel to remember, I find in this passage, is that God is in control. There we go. I want to read verses 22 to 24 for you once again. It says, he sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground, that he blows on them and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. He wants his people to remember that God is in control. And he does that by showcasing the magnitude of this God that they serve. He says that God sits enthroned outside, above the circle of the earth, and that he's in full control up there. You see, when somebody sits on a throne, it's a position of control. And then Isaiah calls to mind this picture of creation where God stretched out the heavens like a canopy in a poetic sense. And he spread out the universe, and it says that he uses it like a tent. That's the kind of God you serve. He's bigger than anyone or anything on this earth. In fact, if you compared him to even the most powerful armies and the most powerful rulers of our world, they are nothing to him. Isaiah says that they're nothing. He says, actually, they're not intimidating. They're not dangerous. They're a non-issue. In fact, he compares them to grasshoppers. How intimidating is a grasshopper, unless you're like a 2-year-old or you have an irrational fear of grasshoppers, and it's a safe place. I'll still make fun of you, but there's no reason to fear grasshoppers. I have a fear of ants. That's different. They're everywhere. If you see one, there's probably quite a few of them on you. I could go into stories, but I'll need therapy. There's no reason to fear grasshoppers. If God's able to spread out the heavens as he pleases and move things around at will, then surely he's able to control these grasshopper kings that walk the earth. And that's where Isaiah is going with these verses. These words would have come as such a huge encouragement to Israel, because they were being oppressed by these rulers that seemed like they were unstoppable. And God says that he brings those rulers to nothing. It's not a problem. The other picture that God uses to describe these rulers is just such a gentle picture. He says that they're like a newly planted, weak and tender seedling. Here's a pretty intimidating shot, don't you think? Even a grasshopper could take on that, right? God's saying it's nothing. In my life, I feel like I've faced my fair share of evil enemies and oppressors and rulers, okay? When I was in high school, there were lots of people that wanted to pound me into the ground and bully me sometimes. I'm willing to admit at this stage of my life, sometimes it may have been my own doing, okay? My mouth may have written checks that my body could not cash. I'm probably alone in that, right? Yeah. I was often pretty intimidated by these situations because these guys were even bigger than me, okay? I didn't know what I was going to do. Lucky for me, my older brother happens to be a fairly large individual, and he had one rule when it came to me, and that was that he was the only one that was allowed to beat me up. Sounds like a great rule in this kind of a situation, but let me tell you, it came with its own sets of pros and cons. I'll say that, okay? There were times where I did not like that rule. But no matter what, when I faced these guys that brought fear and anxiety into my life, when my brother showed up, things seemed to be completely calm, and they just dissipated, like they were no longer an issue. It was just over. Guys walked away. They all of a sudden were friendly to me, and along we went. Things happened as they should. I dodged many bullets that way. We've all been in situations where we seem like we're over our heads. Sometimes it's a result of our own doing, sometimes not. And in those times, we need to submit our lives to God's rule and to his throne. You know, that might mean confessing our disobedience that got ourselves into the mess that we were in the first place, right? It might just be crying out to God and saying that we want to submit to him. Even though things aren't going according to our plans, we want to make sure that we are submitted to God. You know, when we're in overwhelming circumstances, we need to remember and find comfort in knowing that God is enthroned over the earth and that he's also enthroned over your situation. Things may be out of your control, but they're not out of control. The next thing I want us to remember is that God cares. How does Isaiah remind us that God cares? You see, he draws our attention upward again to this picture of a starry sky. Listen to what he says in verse 26. It says, "Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. His point, I believe, is to remind Israel and to remind us that all of these stars were created by God. They were created thoughtfully, they were created intentionally, and they were set into place, and God knows each one of them inside and out. In the past, we've looked at how vast outer space is. The staggering immensity of outer space is just awe-inspiring. The numbers that we gather and the distances that we're learning about are inconceivable. The furthest any human being has ever traveled in outer space is actually just like around the backside of the moon and back. That was Apollo 13 a lot of years ago now. I think about that and I just think, I don't know how many, if that was my family, how many bathroom breaks are needed to go around the moon, for crying out loud, with toddlers. If you wanted to travel to the nearest star, which is called Alpha Centauri, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, it's 4.3 light years away. And if you were traveling at the same speed that the Apollo 13 traveled, it would take you 114,078 years. That's to the nearest star. Cosmologists are telling us now that what they see, like what's observable to us now, is that this universe is at least 46 billion light years across. If your mind isn't blown by that, you're either not listening or I'm not doing a good job. Both are probable, or at least possible. Isaiah is telling us that this God of ours created each one of those stars, and he knows them by name, and by his strength and power, not one of them is missing. Each of them is in his care, and so are you. Jesus reminds us of the same thing, and instead of talking about the stars, he talks about the sparrows and the flowers of the field. And in Matthew chapter 10, he says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care. And even the very hairs on your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid, you're worth more than many sparrows." You see, he's never lost track of a star. He's never lost track of a sparrow, and he hasn't lost track of you. He creates, and what he creates, he cares for. You're not overlooked by God, even in your trials. Thirdly, we need to remember God's wisdom. When you're in a challenging situation that isn't going well or seems to be overwhelming, it can be hard to know what to do. It can seem like you're just surrounded by bad options, and sometimes it's hard to decide between 2 terrible options or 3 bad options, right? You can get paralyzed by that decision. Should you go here? Should you go there? Should you do this? Should you do that? You don't want to overreact. You also don't want to underreact. When you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, it can be so easy to lose hope. And think things like, how could any good come out of this bad situation? In those times, it's so helpful to be reminded not only that God is powerful, not only that he cares, but also that he has all the wisdom in the world. At the end of verse 26, it says, his understanding no one can fathom. You can't understand his understanding. Earlier in the chapter, in verses 13 and 14, Listen to what he says. He asks some rhetorical questions. Who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord or instruct the Lord as his counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him? And who taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge or showed him the path of understanding? When I'm struggling, I feel like I fall often into one of two camps. I either have no idea what to do, feel stressed about that, or else I feel like I know exactly what to do, and I put all this energy out trying to convince God to take my advice. God, I got this situation figured out. I know what needs to happen. Basically, all I'm looking for you is to sign here, and we can move on here. We're partners, right? It's been proven to me over and over and over again, though, that God is already way ahead of me in every situation. That oftentimes what I think needs to happen isn't what needs to happen, and that God actually had a far, far better plan than I ever thought of. Didn't see that coming. You guys relate to that? It's because God's wisdom far, far exceeds our wisdom. There are no loose ends with God. There's nothing left undone. There's comfort in recognizing that God is at work in ways that we aren't aware of. It gives us hope, doesn't it? What that means is just because you can't see God working doesn't mean he's not working. Just because you can't figure out a way for God, that God could possibly redeem your situation, doesn't mean he can't redeem it. He's not asking you for advice. He's wise. He knows what he's doing. He's in the redemption business. And in your trials, we need to remember that God is wise, and we need to go to him and ask him for wisdom. James in chapter 1 invites us to ask God for wisdom and says that he gives generously. Let's make sure that we're not overlooking that invitation, because that's one of the things that we need most often when we're in trials is wisdom, and we can go to him. We need to be looking for wisdom found in God. There's a lot more treasures that we could dig out of this passage, but I want to look at one more, and that's that God provides. It's important to be reminded of that when we're in a situation when we feel like our backs are against the wall, to remember that God is the one who provides for our needs. Listen to what it says in verse 29. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. I think that those are the two things that he lists specifically for Israel, because those are two things that they needed to hear, because they were feeling weak. They were feeling weary. Maybe that's something that you need to hear today. Scripture is filled with verses that tell about a lot of different ways that God provides for his people. There's story after story after story of provision. We could make a long list of all the different things that God provides for us. Things like comfort and peace. Things like hope and a future. Wisdom, all sorts of things, right? We don't have time today to go through all of that, but he loves to supply all of our needs. I do want to highlight one verse for us, because it could be one of the most important verses for us to remember in times of difficulty, and the verse is found in Philippians chapter 4, verse 19. And the Apostle Paul says, "And my God will meet all your needs according to his riches, according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus." Now, what this is not saying is that he's going to fulfill all of your desires, all of your wishes. This is not a genie in a bottle. God's not asking you for a Christmas list. But he will supply your needs. The Apostle Paul, at the time that he wrote this, he was in prison. And he knew that God was supplying his needs. He didn't know what his future held, but he knew that God would supply his needs. That he didn't know what was coming, but he knew that God was already there, that he already had it worked out, and that his needs were already going to be met. I don't know what your road looks like. I don't know what's up ahead, but I do know that God's there ahead of you, and your needs He will take care of. Our role is for us to be in relationship with Him and communication with Him, and just reaching out to Him, asking for help, walking with Him as He walks with us. James says, you do not have because you do not ask. I pray that that's not the case for us. I pray that we are people who are eager to go to God, to ask for help. That we submit ourselves before Him, ask Him that He would supply our needs as He sees fit. Because He has so much more wisdom than we do. He knows what we need, we don't. So let's go to Him and ask that He would give us daily bread, that He would help keep us moving when we feel stuck, when we feel exhausted, that He would give us strength, all of these different things. Isaiah ends this passage that we're looking at today with some encouraging words that are familiar to many of us. He says, even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in, or your version might say, wait on the Lord, will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. The first thing I want to point out there is that this isn't for everybody. He's not making a blanket statement saying one day everybody's going to soar. This is to a specific group of people, in a sense. Who is it for? It's for people who what? Who wait on the Lord, who hope in the Lord. So what does that mean? What does it look like to hope in the Lord? Well, let me just look at it this way. What are some things that in our world we naturally tend to put our hope into and trust into, apart from the Lord? I would say things like our health, money, maybe relationships. It could be our kids. It could be your parents. Whatever you're thinking in your mind is probably, in addition to this list, there's lots and lots of them. But just for the sake of thinking through this, let's pick the easiest one to pick on. What does it look like if your hope is in money? This isn't a sermon against money. I think that if you're focused, like all of your hope and your trust is in money, then all of your world revolves around that, doesn't it? How do I get more of it? How do I protect what I have? How do I build up my bank account so that it's a fortified fortress around me, so that I can look and laugh at anything that comes at me, knowing that I am not vulnerable? I spend my time thinking about money. How can I get more? I am greedy with it, right? Because I can't let this go. I spend my time thinking, investing, collecting, calculating, all these different things. The problem with that, though, is that it's fragile, even though it may not seem so. There's so many stories of people who have been richer than you or I will ever be, and have lost it all in a matter of a very short period of time. And if your hope is in those funds, then your walls come crumbling down and your life is a mess. People go on suicide watch for things like that because their hope was only in their money, and they can't imagine what they're going to do now that it's gone. Same could be said with any of these different subjects. When your hope is in anything but the Lord, your hope is in something that's fragile and can be taken away from you. Your health, your one bad phone call. But when we hope in the Lord, when we place our trust in the Father and in Jesus, we're trusting in the only one that can never be taken from us. When we put our faith in Christ, that means that our eternity and our joy is secure in the Lord, and our faith and our trust is on solid ground, and it will not be shaken. It cannot be shaken. So my hope and my prayer is that you would place your hope in God, that you would nourish yourself on His Word, that you would feed your hope by remembering these things, that God is powerful, that He cares, that He has wisdom, and that He provides for us. Would you pray with me? God, this is, in a sense, an offer to save us from something terrible and false. In a world where we're tempted so often, constantly, to be tempted to put our hope and our faith in something other than you. Your word here reminds us that when we put our trust and our faith and our hope in you, when we wait on you, God, that you are the one who provides. You give us strength to walk. You give us energy to run. God, we can face situations because of the way that you are at work. Your word even says that we can soar like eagles, God. And I pray, Father, that we would be people who take you at your word, that we would put our trust and our hope in you. That this week, no matter what comes at us, God, that we would remember at least these 4 things about you, God, that you are in control, that you care, that you are wise, and you provide. We need you. We need you more than we know. So I ask that you would help us to cling to you, God. In your graciousness to us, help us not to have our hope in other things. We love you. We pray these things in your precious name. Amen.